Hello, everybody. I'm Travis Edrington, and I'm with Scott Lange from Aware Wildlife Center in Atlanta, Georgia, and we're just gonna get right into it. Being a nonprofit, what type of business is this?
So we're a wildlife rehabilitation center. We look after native Georgia wildlife that is either injured or orphaned.
What exactly is wildlife rehabilitation?
So we're like a hospital. Animals come to us that need help, and if they're injured, we try to patch them up. If they're orphaned, we raise them and try to give them the skills they need and get them big enough and strong enough to take care of themselves in the wild. That's always the main goal, is to be able to release them into the wild to live a normal wild life.
How did you get this job, and what kind of background do you have, and your work experience?
So I have a fairly unique background for wildlife, which is, until a couple of years ago, I was actually an attorney. But I sat on the board of directors of Aware because I wanted to help animals, I wanted to help out in the community. And when our previous executive director moved on, I agreed to step in on an interim basis, and I liked it so much, I wanted to stay, and they wanted to keep me. So here I am.
What do you see Aware in the next 5 years and the next 10 years?
Well, our sort of long-term goal is to be able to accept every animal that needs help, every wild animal that needs help, as a patient here. As it is, we are limited by the amount of staff we have, the amount of donations we receive. That we can only afford a certain amount of food, certain amount of medicine, et cetera, et cetera. And so there are times and certain amount of space that we have. So there are times that we have to turn folks away or send them to other rehabbers. What we'd like to be able to do is get big enough that we can take every single animal that needs help.
Can you describe what a typical day might be like?
So for me as the director, I spend a lot of time in my office on the computer, emailing people, arranging programs, talking to our supporters, emailing our entire community, just sharing the message of peaceful coexistence with wildlife. For our staff and our volunteers, for almost everyone else who's here, their day-to-day activities are directly hands-on working with the animals, cleaning up after them, feeding them, medicating them, treating their wounds, etc. So it's pretty different for me and for everyone else.
What do you look for in people who may want to work for you, or what increases one chance?
So, far and away, everyone who's here is here because they care about wildlife, and that's the single essential thing that anyone has to have. Typically the way people come to actually work here is that they volunteer here first, and they learn skills, they sort of prove themselves, and then when it comes time to hire, we only have 5 paid animal care staff, 1 full-time and 4 part-time. And so when one of those jobs comes available, we usually hire from within our own volunteer base, again, people who have already learned some skills and sort of proven themselves.
What would you advise for somebody trying to do wildlife rehab work?
So just volunteer, either at a center like this, or there's independent rehabbers, there's other wildlife centers wherever you live, so just go find a rehabber and ask to help. You'll start out doing pretty basic stuff like cleaning. Here you might be sweeping and mopping and cleaning cages, doing laundry, that kind of thing. But steadily, as you show you're reliable and gain some skills, you start getting to feed things and medicate things, and before long, you're working hands-on with some pretty fascinating wildlife.
What should somebody do if they see a wild animal, like an animal limping, or a bird with an injured wing?
So if you're certain that it's injured, so usually the best thing to do, and what we encourage folks to do, is to contact a rehabber and ask their expert advice on whether the animal actually needs help. Sometimes the best thing to do is to leave an animal alone. That happens a lot, especially with nestlings or fledglings, which are not nestlings, but fledgling birds that have hopped out of the nest and they're learning to fly from the ground. A lot of times people want to interfere and bring them to a rehabber, but actually what they need is to be left alone. With injuries, it's a little it's a little fuzzier. It's a little, different situations call for different action. And so if you contact a rehabber, they can direct you on what to do. And if you're here in Atlanta, you should email us, and we give that kind of advice. We take over 10,000 contacts a year from people looking for guidance.
So this guy, he was actually, oh no, this is Cessna. Cessna, I'll try and show you, she has an injury to her left wrist. She and Stella were both caught by outdoor cats. And so, cats are really good hunters. They do cause injuries to small rodents though. So these guys have a permanent injury that they're called flying squirrels because they have extra skin between their arms and legs. They can put their arms out and they can glide. They jump off a really high branch. They can glide really, really far.
What kinds of animals do you see here in the Atlanta area?
So we accept every native species of Georgia wildlife. So that includes hawks, owls, songbirds, bats, possums, armadillos, skunks, turtles, snakes, bobcats, flying squirrels, chipmunks, regular squirrels, gray squirrels. Literally any wildlife that you would see or even not see that's hiding away in the woods. We help them all.
What would you say to somebody who's trying to get a wild animal as a pet, like an otter or a squirrel or even a monkey?
So, first of all, taking native wildlife as a pet is illegal. So you can go to jail. So you don't want to do that. There's a good reason it's illegal, which is that wild animals are, biologically and psychologically prepared to live in the wild. That is where they're happiest. That's where they're most comfortable. That's where they can live the best life. And when people interfere with that and take them into their homes, it's bad for the animals. It's bad for the people. People can get hurt. Animals certainly can get hurt. 4 of our permanent resident ambassadors are actually here for that reason, because someone decided they just wanted to have them as a pet and took them from the wild as babies and tried to raise them, and it never works out. So in all 4 cases, 2 skunks and 2 bobcats in 4 separate occasions, they grew up and people decided, oh, we don't want them after all. And they were so acclimated to people that they couldn't go back into the wild, and they were basically doomed to a life of captivity. We try to make that life as good as we can for them here, but it never should have had to be like that. They should have gotten to live in the wild.
What does AWARE stand for?
Atlanta Wild Animal Rescue Effort. That's our sort of original name. We're now best known as just AWARE Wildlife.
What is baby season and what is that like?
So baby season runs from about March to about October, and it's basically the busiest time of the year for us, both because animals are having babies and orphans out there are in need of help, but also people are more active and out in the wilderness encountering these animals. And so for both reasons, we end up with more animals being brought to us. Like I said, it starts in March, and the species sort of change. Different species have babies at different times. Probably peaks in terms of the number of animals coming in the door in April, and then changes over the course of the summer until about October. We have a rush of squirrels toward the end, and that's when it winds down. And then we get a few months over the winter that are quieter and a little chance for us to catch our breath.
Do you have educational programs, and how do people go about getting you to come to their churches, their schools, birthday parties, etc.?
Yeah, so we do educational wildlife programs. People can go on our website, which is awarewildlife.org, and get all the details. But basically what usually happens is one of our volunteer handlers will bring ambassadors wherever they need to go, and put on a program. Sometimes they stand and talk like in a classroom setting for up to an hour, and then it can also be like at a festival type setting where they stand at a table and people trickle by over the course of the day.
Being a nonprofit, how do you get most of your money to operate each year?
So we're almost entirely reliant on private individuals who donate because they care about animals. We do get a few sponsorships from corporations that help us out, and again, usually that's because there are people there who really care about wildlife and want to help through their companies. But We don't get any government funding, and we basically rely on folks like you to go to awarewildlife.org/donate and make a donation. Even $10, $25, $50, every donation helps. And it costs us, on average, it varies, but on average it costs us around $81 per animal that we treat as a patient. So, that's sort of a rule of thumb of what it takes to buy the food and medicine and supplies to be able to care for the animals like they need to be cared for.
How might somebody go about opening their own wildlife center?
So it's complicated. There's a number of permits that you have to, depending on exactly what you want to do, if you want to do education, or if you want to just do rehab. There's different permits if you are working with migratory bird species, which is pretty much every bird falls under that Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So basically you have to get all your paperwork in line. Most rehabbers rehabilitate out of their own homes, so they don't start with a center, they start with a garage or whatever it might be. But the DNR will actually come and inspect your location, whatever it might be, make sure it's good for the animals, and then you grow it from there.
They're really good at balancing, but in Sydney's case, she's missing one of her 4 legs, so she does have problems balancing. If she were trying to get away from a predator, by climbing a tree, it would be really hard for her. And she's also just been in rehab since she was really little, so she's kind of gotten used to this. Any questions?
Is it illegal to have a possum as a pet?
Yes, because of Georgia state law. You're not supposed to have any Georgia native species as a pet.
What do you do with animals who are successfully rehabbed, and what about the ones that there's nothing that you can do for them?
So, if we can't save an animal, then, either they pass away on their own, or we may have to humanely euthanize if they have no chance of a good quality of life. But if they do make it, and the majority do, then we release them. It's always, if they can be released, they do get released 100% of the time. And then we do those releases. If they're adults, we release them where they came from, because they might know that area. They might know where the water source is, or where the food is, or they might even have a mate out there. Whereas if they're babies and they don't have a home to go back to really, then we'll just try to pick a good location that's good, safe, has the food or environment that they need.
What kinds of medicines do y'all use, and are they any different than the medicines that we use when we're sick?
Yeah, it's a long and complicated story, but the short answer is we use very similar, in fact the same meds that your veterinarian would use, which are usually, they may not be the exact same medicines that people would use, but they're equivalent. So there's painkillers and there's antibiotics. They may be different painkillers and different antibiotics, but they serve a similar function. We give rabies vaccines, we give distemper vaccines. Like I said, very similar to what you might give to your pet, or what your veterinarian might give to your pet for you.
Are there any classes that people can take to help specifically with rehab?
Yeah, so it just depends on where you are, whether you can find rehabber, a formal rehab class, or whether it's better to just find an individual rehabber to learn from. We have started hosting our own classes, although not necessarily on the broad topic of how to rehab, but on more specific topics sort of adjacent to rehab. But really the best way to learn is hands-on. So like I said, just find a rehabber or rehab center and ask if you can help out, and go from there.
Why do state and federal agencies require permits for wildlife?
The biggest reason, and of course I can't speak for them, but the main reason I think is that they want to make sure that people who are working with wildlife are doing so for the right reasons, and doing so in the right conditions. So, they're not trying to make an animal into a pet, and that they are qualified so that they're actually going to be helping the animal and not hurt it by mistake. Make sure the place that they're in is appropriate for taking care of wildlife. And so, they check on all of those things.
What are some tips that you can give individuals to be more wildlife friendly or be more wildlife conscious around their homes and their communities?
Them and he gets hit by a car. So it's much better to either throw them deep into the woods or take it home and compost it. And, other ones, one good thing to remember is that, and I think I mentioned this already too, but that fledgling birds do not need to go back in a nest, and they do not need to be taken, especially don't need to be taken away from their parents to a rehabber. So if you see a bird with decent amount of feathers sort of hopping around on the ground, it's not like a tiny, tiny hairless baby, but it's also not an adult yet. That is probably a fledgling, and it probably should be left alone. And then the third tip is if you're going to mow your lawn, you should look out for bunny rabbits, which tend to nest in just little shallows in the ground. It can very easily be hit with a lawnmower. You can run into actually our ambassador turtle, who's in this enclosure behind Travis, is here because she got run over by a lawnmower. So if you can just sort of walk your lawn before you mow it and look for anything that might get run into and try to move it to safety first, we advise that.
It up like a box when she's feeling scared. Shelly was actually in a lawnmower accident. So you can see she has a little patch on her shell. The shell was damaged, but it is made of bone, so it will grow back just very, very, very slowly.
Yeah.
She also is missing her back leg here, or her foot back here. And so she would have a hard time surviving the winter because she can't really dig a really deep burrow. And also you can see she just sticks her arms and legs out. A wild box turtle is going to be scared and it's going to close up inside. But Shelly is just really super friendly for some reason, and she's always sticking her head out. She always wants to say hi. Okay.
Snakes are an important part of the ecosystem. What do you have to say to the people who say only good snake is a dead snake?
Well, at least in Georgia, I can't speak for every state, but at least in Georgia, almost every snake you're going to encounter is not venomous. So most of these snakes are only here to live their life, take care of pests for you. We have our black rat snake, Jeffrey, is one of our ambassadors, who lives in this enclosure back in the corner over here behind Travis. And he's a good example. All he wants to do out in the wild, if he could be in the wild, would be to just go after rodents and pests that you probably don't want around your home. And even venomous snakes, to be honest, there's no snake in America that wants to hurt you. So even venomous snakes are only a danger to the extent you confront them or run into them. So if you just steer clear and leave them alone, they'll be happy and you will too.
What's the most rewarding part of your job?
I really like being surrounded by so many volunteers and staff, all of whom are here because they want to make the world a better place, especially for animals, but just in general. They all sacrifice, they all give something up to be here, whether it's their time or money or whatever. And it's just nice to be around people like that.
What's the most challenging part of your job?
I don't know. There's many parts. I guess the hours probably. I like being here so much that I choose to be here pretty much 7 days a week, 10, 11, 12 hours a day. And that can be tiring somewhat, but I also love it, so I'm happy to get to do it.
What keeps you coming back here every day?
Just that sense of enjoyment, that sense of goodwill and sort of happiness I get being surrounded by people who are working hard to make a difference.
When people have to bring babies in here during baby season, should they feed them before bringing them here?
So we advise that people don't give food or water to the animals that they might potentially be bringing in. Almost always, so it's really impossible to tell whether an animal needs water and food or not. And sometimes it can actually be counterproductive, especially if they're injured and their systems are kind of shut down somewhat. If you give them food, they'll use their energy to process that food and that might be the only energy they had left to hang on. Furthermore, if you're bringing them to a rehabber, it's extraordinarily unlikely that an animal is going to starve to death in the next 2 hours or 3 hours. But you could possibly hurt it by giving it the wrong food. So, for that reason, we sort of play the odds and encourage people to not give food or water until they bring the animal here, and then we can figure out what the best course of action is.
For somebody trying to get into working with wildlife, what does the pay look like for somebody?
So the pay is low, frankly. I'm making a small fraction of what I made as an attorney. A small fraction. And there's no such thing, at least as far as I'm aware, as a for-profit wildlife center. Everybody who does this does it because they care and because they're trying to help and not for the money. I think that basically covers it. I mean, at every level, you would certainly make more money in the private sector doing similar work. If you work for a vet but doing similar stuff, you would make more money.
What kinds of diseases may you guys encounter while working with wildlife?
So, we certainly look out for rabies. It's a major concern because it's such a threat to people if you do get it. But it's not very common, and we have protocols to follow when dealing with rabies vector species to limit the chance of contracting it. There are a number of other called zoonotic diseases that can be transferred from animals to people that we look out for. To be perfectly honest, as the executive director and not the hands-on animal care guy, I would be sort of bluffing if I went too far into the details there, because it's just not my area of expertise. But there are certainly a variety of diseases to look out for.
Okay, that's all the questions I have for you. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Travis.
No problem. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked what you saw, make sure to like and subscribe. There's going to be a lot more videos I'm going to be posting, so if you want to stay informed, make sure to like and subscribe. Thank you.